Good afternoon, everyone. One of these... Nothing works. Okay. One of these two apps is the native calendar app on Android, and the second one is a website. It's a modern website known as a progressive web app. Let's take a look at option A. Now let's take a look at option B. Now, raise your hand if you think option A is the progressive web app. Raise your hand if you think option B is the progressive web app. And now raise your hand if you have no idea. That's what I expected. It's pretty much indistinguishable. Some of you guessed it, but in fact, option A is the progressive web app. And you may have guessed because this was recorded on June 2, and the icon is 2. I did it on purpose to show you that there's still limitations of progressive web apps. So let's think about this for a second. This thing you're seeing here, this is a website. It's built with the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This is really exciting because this is a website, which means it's a link, it's a URL. I can take this URL, send it to my friend, and then they can simply open it. They don't need to go through any store. They don't need to have any special permissions. We get all of these benefits alongside reduced app size, tremendously reduced app size. In fact, Twitter Lite, has anybody used Twitter Lite? It's Twitter's progressive web app. It's only 1 megabyte on Android or iOS. It's only 1 megabyte. And then it loads for more resources as it needs it. Compare that to 28 megabytes on Android for the native app. Who wants to guess the iOS app? Yeah? How much? Who wants to guess? No, that's too low. Super low. 184 megabytes for iOS. Companies building progressive web apps are seeing reduced app size and increased user engagement. Our users are constantly on the go, and they're always eager to have a pleasant mobile experience. But I'm going to be honest with you, it doesn't often happen. Our experience with the mobile web is really bad. And in fact, when you go to a PWA, PWAs are exactly meant for that, because when you go to a PWA, the browser will ask you if you'd like to add it to your home screen. And with one click of a button, you have it on your home screen. In upcoming versions of Chrome, you can expect to see it in the URL bar as part of on desktop, on mobile, and on tablet. This is not the final one. It might change. And all of this happens by simply adding a manifest in the head of your page that points to a manifest.json file. And in this manifest.json file, you have some properties about your application. So for example, you have the name that shows up on the home screen, you have the background color for the splash screen, you have the theme color, etc. And when you go back to the home screen and click on it, it just looks like an app. And in fact, this is the same progressive web app running from 3 different browser vendors, and you can't tell the difference. If I remove the names up there, you can't really tell the difference. It's the same PWA running from all Chrome, Firefox, and Samsung Internet. This is all on Android, and you have the same on iOS Safari, but it's the iPhone X, so the proportions are really skewed. That's because when you add a PWA to the home screen, it just looks like an app. And soon, progressive web apps are coming to your desktop. If you have a Chromebook already, you can already do this. And this is simply my MacBook, same progressive web app, but with some experimental flags enabled. And now look, calendar. And even if you go to this switcher, you're going to see it as a separate app. It's the same calendar app. You can resize it, make it full screen. I even have some similar tools to David to resize my screen, and it works on it. Magnet. And this is the Twitter Lite PWA. If anyone used it on mobile, this is how it looks like on desktop. And it also looks like an app. I seriously can't wait to uninstall the native Trello app and native Slack app that need to be updated every single week from the store, because there's an upstream fix. So our users are always on the go, and that doesn't mean they always have good internet connection. In fact, they're constantly switching between 4G, 3G, 2G, and they even go offline. And this is exactly where service workers shine in. So a service worker is a cross-browser API that sits in between the website and the network, and it allows us to handle incoming and outgoing requests. And service workers open up a whole new set of possibilities, but the most important one is making the website work offline. Now, service workers are a very low-level API, so you can't expect to make it website.offline. But you can get started with service workers very easily by using Workbox. Workbox is a node module and CLI that allows you to easily work with high-level use cases for progressive web apps. So getting started with Workbox is actually easy. You have to just start with Workbox Wizard, which scans your directory and helps you ask you a couple of questions to generate your configuration file. And then once you generate this configuration file, you run generate SW with the config, and that generates your service worker. For more advanced use cases, you can also use inject manifest, which allows you to stay in control of your service worker and still generate other parts of it. There are also some common strategies that are often used, like cache first, network first, and stale while revalidate. So cache first always goes to the cache first. Let's take the example of the Twitter PWA, and they want to get the list of tweets. So cache first means we always go through the cache first until it expires, and then we go to the network. Network first goes always to the network first, and if there's no internet or if the internet is super slow, then we consult the cache as a backup. And stale while revalidate goes to both the network and the cache at the same time. You get the response from the cache most of the time, and then the network response will update the cache for the next time you use it. Check out my article on Medium for a quick introduction to Workbox. So in a nutshell, service workers allow you to make web app work offline through two techniques. So first of all, you write a static app shell. Has anybody built an app shell for his or her app? Okay. And this is the Twitter native applications app shell. And in fact, you can do the same on a PWA. This is a native app pattern that we took and did it also on the web. So you just load the application shell without any data, and then only when you have the data, you put it inside of it. So how do you do it in HTML, CSS, JavaScript? You simply inline all of those critical resources, and you put all of them in the index.html. If you have a more complicated use case, you can do this dynamically, as long as everything is inline. And then for all the other resources, let's say like loading the tweets, this is where you decide, I want to use cache first, network first, stale while revalidate. This depends on your use case. So service workers not only allow your app to work offline, but they actually opened up a lot of other use cases, like receiving push notifications. Your app can now receive push notifications even if the app itself is not open. I have to note there's no iOS support for this one yet. Another use case is deferring tasks until the user has connectivity. So to give you an example about this one, if you're using WhatsApp and you don't have internet at the moment, you send a message and you think it's going to send in the future. So you close your app and lock your phone and put it in your pocket and then keep walking until you have internet or Wi-Fi. Only when you have internet, it will start sending. This is this use case. And it works on 3 browsers. Another one is periodic sync. This one is currently being standardized, so it doesn't work on any browser yet. It might change as well, which allows you to run a piece of code every certain interval. minimum period, and even if your website is not running. You can also be specific about the power state and the network state. So progressive web apps are all about having a good user experience. And one main pillar of this is web performance. We cannot achieve this without web performance. So I'm going to talk about some of the techniques. I'm going to talk about just 2 techniques, but there's plenty others. The first one is device fonts. Is anyone familiar with device fonts? Yeah, perfect. So device fonts are weightless, whereas web fonts are still super heavy at the moment. And if you go to medium.com, for example, you see on the left, we have an iPhone, which shows San Francisco font. And on Android, the same website shows Roboto. Users on Android are used to Roboto, whereas users on iOS are used to San Francisco. Not only this font is free to use because it's already on the platform, this is also something our users are used to. But how do you use device fonts? At the moment, you have to stack all the different variations, and then the one that matches first, it means our users are on this platform. So if you match on Sego UI, then you most likely are on Windows, unless you manually install this font. So you can take a look at how to match them. First one is for Safari, second one is for Chrome, etc. The second approach for performance is code splitting. And this is really fundamental for progressive web apps. The motivation behind it is that having 1 megabyte of JavaScript can take up to 8 seconds on a real mobile device to evaluate and even to execute. So instead of having like one big file, we want to start breaking up. So you take the example of updating the password. Rather than always having the update password code shipped on every single page of your app, and it's not going to be needed, you only load it, you only import it when it's needed. I love this use case. It's from Uber's PWA. It's m.uber.com. And if you take they do a very smart approach for this. If you take a look at the source code, you see that they have 3 scripts: vendor, main, and app. And these scripts in total are not over 200 kilobytes, which means you can request a ride on m.uber, they call it Moober, for just 200 kilobytes. Why? Because this is their core user journey. They don't really care to urgently give you the option to update your password. In fact, for all of the other functionalities, they're simply lazy loaded. They only load them when they're needed. So there's plenty of examples here. Sharing a trip on Facebook, promotions, payments, etc. These chunks are only loaded when they're needed. I like to think about code prioritization in 3 steps. First one for critical code. So this is for your core user journey or your core business model. User journey. And then you load it as soon as possible. And then secondary for all the UI stuff that you need to load as soon as possible after the critical code. So for example, the sidebar. And then infrequent chunks is for all the other functionalities that are not going to be used very often. So I've been talking about progressive web apps for a while now. But what is a PWA? This is the hardest definition, and you'll never see the same definition anywhere. But I think that progressive web apps are all about having a good user experience. And the focus here is on the term progressive. So let me give you an example. There's so many features inside the umbrella term, which is progressive web app. But you don't have to have support for all of them for your progressive web app to work perfectly. So if you ship an app today, a PWA, and your user don't have desktop PWA support because nobody has it yet, then it's fine. As soon as they will have access to it in the future, it will work. Also, the add to home screen is slightly different from browser vendor to another one, even non-existent on iOS. There's no prompt. You have to do it. You have to tell the user you can add it. But it still works. For me, progressive web apps are a set of ongoing solutions for the pain points of the mobile web. Because we know how easy it is to build a website. It's super easy. This is why we love the web. It's also very open. But at the same time, it used to suck a lot on mobile. And this is what PWAs are fixing. And the good thing about it, this is not something that works on one browser. This is a cross-browser effort. So progressive web apps indeed work on all major browsers. So Chrome, Firefox, Opera, Edge, Safari, Samsung Internet, and many more. I have to note, there are some issues or some bugs on the current implementation iOS, Safari, but this is their first PWA, so their first PWA release, so we need to give them more time. So these browsers are working together to bring us the best of native on the web. And there are plenty of upcoming web APIs, but I'm going to focus on the top 3, in my opinion. The first one is the payment request API, which allows you to have a native payment dialog that shows you all your safeguards, saved addresses, and you just choose one of them. This is not a payment provider, so you still have to use Stripe, Braintree, PayPal, etc. It just makes it easier on the user experience to just choose, click, choose a card, choose an address, ship. Another one is the intersection observer, which makes it much easier to do infinite scrolling use cases. It's a low-level API that just tells you that this element is now available in the viewport or not available. And my favorite is the web share API that simply allows you to share content on other apps. But this one only works on Chrome for Android, so I have to see it somewhere else as well. So these new web APIs open up some new use cases for the web. But in other scenarios, we never ever thought about the web for it to be an option. So let's take this example of user interface design. Have you ever thought about having a UI interface design tool in a browser? Never. This area was always for native desktop apps. But in fact, this is changing very soon. Or actually, it already has begun. It has already changed with WebAssembly. That's because WebAssembly allows you to complement your JavaScript code by running crucial parts in C++ or C. You compile it to WebAssembly and it runs at near native performance. So let's take an example. So also cross-browser works on all browsers. So I'm going to take the business use case here. And let's go again about the UI design tools. You're all familiar with Adobe Photoshop, Illustrator, right? Yeah, these tools were not made for UI designs, but designers had no other option because they didn't really have other tools. And these tools were too big and too native to adapt to the market. This is why we had a new bunch of tools like Sketch, Adobe XD, and InVision Studio. So these apps were meant to tackle all of these problems and give the designers the tool that they needed. And these tools are also native desktop apps. And the cool kid here is Figma. Has anybody used Figma? Do you love it? So Figma is very interesting because Figma is just a website. It's built with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and WebAssembly. And what's really special about it is just simply a web app. And at the beginning, you might think this is inferior. It's a website, so it's inferior to native desktop apps. But in fact, Figma was the first to bring innovation to this space. If you've never used Figma, here's how it works. You can do prototyping, wireframing, all in the same tool. You don't have to do it in Sketch, take the screenshot, upload to Marvel, etc. But this is not the innovation I'm talking about. This is a screenshot of it running on a browser in Chrome. So it works on Chrome, Firefox, all browsers. It runs on all operating systems because it's just a website. And it feels like the cost for experimentation for Figma is just super low compared to all the other apps. This is why they rolled out all of these cool features. And now the competition is trying to follow them, and that's why Sketch is doing all of these new features again. So they were the first to include cloud-based editing. You no longer say wireframes_1, wireframes final 2. Wireframe types seriously final this time. You just go online and then you edit, this is the latest version. It's also cross-platform. You have live editing between multiple designers at the same time. I think Sketch only started supporting this a month ago. They even have advanced components which are enhanced over symbols in Sketch. Has anyone used Live Embed? You have. We have it on Kit. So Live Embed is really cool. It allows you to embed a design in a web page. I really don't think Sketch will ever be able to make this anytime soon. And they even have a web API. It's really cool, and I think GitHub is using this web API. They design something on Figma, and then they automatically connect it to Git. So they export the icons automatically to the Git repository. And I know also another team using it, which is Uber. So you see, with WebAssembly, you can expect a lot of apps like cryptography-related apps, video and image processing, like a whole new set of applications. And you see, in some scenarios, the web platform is much more powerful than a native, mainly because of the openness on the web. In fact, whenever I'm using a native app, I have no idea if this app is recording video or recording audio. Can you tell? There's no way to tell. But on the web, if you have a website recording video, you will have a sticky notification telling you that this website, not Chrome, this website is accessing your video input. And what I really like as well is that if you have an update on a PWA, you don't have to go to the store, close the app while it updates, and then download 50 megs. Just have a toast, click reload, and that's it. Now, at the same time, and with all of the web's superpowers, I can confidently tell you that PWAs are paving the way, and native is here to stay. So it's not like PWAs are going to replace native. I don't think this is the point. It's just going to make it easier for a lot of us to build better user experiences on mobile and on web. So after all, there are millions of use cases, millions of apps, and it doesn't make sense for all of them to be built in one technology. Is this too much? Because I have super more exciting stuff. So the web you're seeing right now will most likely evolve in the future, thanks to a set of new web standards called web packaging. This is still super new. Everything I'm saying might change, might be removed, but it's super fresh. So let me show you the first use case. If I search for something on Google and I land on this AMP page, what's really annoying about AMP, or like the #1 criticism of it, was that it's not on Pinterest.com. It's on google.com/amp, etc. Let's see it one more time. So it's still on google.com, etc. But if I go to Chrome beta and I enable some flags, look what's going to happen. I'm still on the AMP cache. I'm not really on Pinterest.com. I'm still on the AMP cache, but it shows Pinterest.com. And it looks really simple, but there's a lot of work going on to make sure that this is still secure. It's really coming from Pinterest.com. But the reason behind it is because why is AMP really fast? Is because it preloads the page before you click on it. But it preloads it in a way that makes sure your privacy is not, like it's always private to you. So it doesn't really show Pinterest that you loaded it. And that's why they need to preload it on the AMP server. But this allows other technologies to do the same thing while also showing you Pinterest.com. Again, this is still super new, but there's even a more futuristic use case, which is, let's imagine you're in a remote area without Wi-Fi and you're using a PWA. If you really like it, you can just share it. You may be able to share it to your friend, and then your friend can open this PWA and it's still going to show up the URL that's supposed to be. And then your friend can use this PWA even offline. So it's useful if you're in remote areas or even if you want to bypass government censorship. So the current state and the future of the web look really exciting. I really can't wait for you to start to try progressive web apps. And even though you're all using front-end frameworks at work, and you will eventually use a front-end framework, I want to recommend that you start from scratch. So take a step back and learn PWAs from scratch without any framework. just to learn it. At the end, use your framework. This will make sure you have a good PWA experience from scratch. In fact, this is the same approach that I take when I present PWA workshop to companies. We always want to make sure that their employees or developers understand progressive web apps from scratch before going into the sugary coat of frameworks. And always test with Lighthouse, because if you've got plenty of recommendations for performance, progressive web apps, accessibility, SEO, and best practices. I really hope you enjoyed this talk. I'm going to answer your questions, and you can come to me after the talk for questions.
Thanks for the talk. Awesome. Obviously, the way to go. I completely agree with what you said. I often have clients who are skeptical about moving away from native onto effectively HTML, JavaScript, CSS-based apps. One of the criticisms that I get a lot is that there are clients now who have an iOS solution and an Android solution, and the look and feel in those apps will suit those platforms. So if you do away with that and have a centralized PWA, how do you customize look and feel to each target platform? In your example, you showed Google Calendar on OS X, but it looked kind of like an Android app. So I don't know if you found a good way of solving that problem.
Okay, so I haven't really done this, but you could either build two progressive web apps if it makes sense, or you can even maybe build the same progressive web app with two UIs, but that would probably be very complicated. I haven't really experimented with it, but what you can do is just simply, it's kind of a hack, but this is what also Ionic does. At load time, they add classes at the HTML element, and then like, this is iOS, this is Android, and then you do all the rest in CSS. It doesn't always work, depends on your use case. And I just want to go back to the first part of the question. Sometimes PWA doesn't make sense. So I wanted to get everyone excited about it, but at the same time, native is also here to stay. So keep it in mind. Any other question?
Here.
Yeah.
Thanks for the talk.
Thank you.
I have a question about limitation of progressive web apps.
Invitation?
Limitation.
Limitation, yeah.
Yeah. So when exactly we cannot use progressive web apps to build a mobile app?
So there's a lot of use cases. So it really depends on exactly what you're trying to build. Can you be more specific?
Yeah, I need just to hear some two examples. Two examples.
Two examples. Two examples of where it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to start with something a bit silly, but like just here, exactly, you cannot really dynamically change the icon of the app based on the day. But also to give you more useful examples, you cannot access the print, at least not yet. I don't know if it's currently being worked. So sometimes you have missing APIs. Sometimes you have missing APIs, but you can polyfill them, so then it makes sense to use it. If push notifications is part of your core business, then it doesn't make sense to use it yet for iOS. It's so I would always research at the beginning. If you have media heavy apps, I think this is possible, but I don't have a lot of experience in it. So I would always go first research and see, these are the things I think I'm going to use, and 95% of them work, so I'm going to go with it, or not.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for the talk. In the past, I've used Ionic and Cordova and that stuff. Hearing what you said about the progressive web apps, sometimes there may be use cases where we just have a need for a simple app that could be written like a progressive web app, but still we want to push it to the App Store for the users who are used to install it through the App Store. I know that's not really the point of web apps, progressive web apps, but is there a way to push it to an App Store simply?
I think you still have to wrap it with Cordova.
Yeah.
And most of the times we do PWAs because we want to bypass the store, but if you have a use case where you really need to have the packaging, then you do it with Cordova. And it may make sense, like if you really want to have just a PWA, but at the same time you want to have a widget on Android. I really don't think this is going to be possible anytime in the coming few years. So in that case, you can build a PWA and then package it in Cordova and add like the native functionality. And the nice thing about PWA is really, it's not something defined because it's just about having good UX. So you're basically doing a website packaged in Cordova with very good UX. So you can also use everything you learned from PWAs.
I read an article on that a few weeks ago. I will look in my browser history, and if I can find it, I will post it on the Twitter of the conference. It was explaining how they were distributing both via the button in the navigator, but as well in the app stores, not to lose their historical user base, which we're expecting to find the app on the app stores. It was very interesting, but I don't remember the details. I'll find it back. Okay, thank you, Jad.
All right, thank you.